All right, guys, welcome back to Marlins 9. Thank you all for listening. As always, I'm your host, Jeremiah Geiger, and joining the show again is Joe Frisaro. Joe, how you doing?
Jeremiah, thanks for having me back. Twice in a month, and really appreciate being back. Look forward to it.
Looking forward to this one too. And quick shout out recognition for last week's episode. Everybody that tuned in, the most viewed podcast I've done in Marlins 9 history. So that episode with Glenn Geffner was a good one. So thank you guys for listening and hearing our thoughts on the organization. And hopefully we continue the development of this podcast in 2024. But Joe, first topic I kind of want to get into today. We talked about the front office. We talked about the direction of this team. I think is the main points me and Glenn Geffner and yourself and I were focused on the last couple episodes. But where does this team move forward in terms of building a fan base? I think that's the first topic we're going to get into is in South Florida, how do the Marlins build a committed and hungry fan base?
Yeah, and right now we're seeing with the Florida Panthers, the frenzy that's going on as the Panthers are trying to make their run for the Stanley Cup, and you can see an organization, one of the pro teams we have down here, that has kind of captured the imagination of the fan base, and obviously the product matters, and transparency matters, and accountability matters, honesty matters, and on our specifically with the Miami Marlins, and since Peter Bendix took over, this has been anything but that. They've been dishonest. Uh, I refer to it as they've flat out lied. Glenn, I saw, echoed the same words, and they could try to dance all around that, but they lied to the fan base. And all the proof you need is the people that have reached out to me who attended FanFest and were being told one message. If you look at their off-season marketing, I think it was like more in 24 or whatever it was. They're sending out a lot of literature, giving a build off the momentum of a playoff appearance in 2023, and they made no effort, serious effort, to upgrade the 24 roster. And in doing so, and I don't want to keep kicking the dead horse on this, but it's it came down to when you did nothing, you actually went backwards. Is my
Mhm.
thought. If you in the offseason, I've covered baseball long enough, teams are either going for it or you're not. So you don't you don't not make a serious run for Soler and then sign Tim Anderson a week into camp or whatever it was for 5 million. Because Jeremiah, didn't it look like when Tim Anderson took it almost looked like Peter, here's 5 million you got to spend. Will anyone take it? And Tim Anderson at last raised his hand. And
Right.
I think they would have given it to, I don't know, anybody in indie ball if they would have raised their hand fast enough. Yeah, I'll take your 5 million, which tells me they never had a plan. Because your plan wasn't, you can't come out and say Tim Anderson's due for a bounce back year, our analytics, blah, blah, blah. And because the bottom line is he's the same Tim Anderson he was a year ago, which is the reason why he was available and why the White Sox cut ties. And being friends with Jazz doesn't mean that you're going to, wake up and be a great player in Miami in 24. So how do you build your fan base back? For one, give them something to hang their hats on, and two, don't lie to them and say we're going for it and do nothing.
No, absolutely nothing. Like the degree of effort they put into the offseason, it was zero. And I mean that not just the major league roster and standing pat or making an addition here and there. Apart from Tim Anderson and Bethencourt and a couple bullpen pieces that aren't going to move the needle, Peter Bendix, his whole mantra this offseason was one eye on the present, one eye on the future. Okay, I can get behind that as a fan because in that sense, I'm listening to that and I hear, okay, so we're committed to building a consistent winning team, a consistent winning culture. We have the manager in place in Skip Schumacher who took your team to the playoffs last year. We're establishing this winning culture, but we're also going to continue with the core that we have, with Luis Arias, with Jazz Chisholm. We have good starting pitching. And then you can make additions to the minor leagues. Well, they didn't do anything. really. Essentially, they made very cheap moves, and now they're paying the price. You're sitting at 22, 23 games under 500, whatever it is now.
I think it's 21, just to be fair.
21,
Yeah.
yeah. It will be 22 after tonight, probably. But and it makes you wonder as a fan, like, where is the direction? Where is the accountability? Because that's what it comes down to, is the accountability. You took some accountability when you DFA'd Avi Garcia. You ate the money, you got rid of his spot on the 40-man roster, and it had to be done. Okay, it just had to be done. And I applaud them for that, because Avi Garcia was making $12 million. He was absolutely putrid in the major league lineup when he was healthy, and he was blocking younger players. But then they go around, within the same week, within like the same time frame, and they don't designate, but they option Xavier Edwards in favor of Tim Anderson, who has no future on this team and is statistically the worst hitter in baseball. And to me, I look at that and I think, is this Peter Bendix? Is this the front office just not willing to own up to a mistake that they made? Like, let the young guy play. It doesn't make any sense.
Well, in a nutshell, I haven't looked at all the data on it, but service time's always a factor. Always keep that in mind with younger players. So they could be looking at with Xavier Edwards or whoever it is that they have in the wings. They may know the days that they need them down X amount of days to retain service for yet another year. So we'll throw that. But when you talked about Skip Schumacher, which just reminded me of my intro rant, is they knew before FanFest that Skip's status wasn't, beyond this year. And they covered that up and used the
Right.
whole skip it opening day they used your manager, who you knew was a lame duck manager, as your marketing promotional guy. They literally were taking Luis Arise to an ARB hearing right about the time FanFest was going on, right when the hearings were going on with our hearings, which they obviously told him he's a terrible defensive player as they were trying to make their case, and using him to promote attending FanFest, get a Luis Arise autograph bat.
Right.
So they're self-aware. It's very strange that, none of this, again, a little back and forth I have with some of my buddies on X, when I note about the word lying and then are reminded, oh, well, optics aren't good. No, it's not optics. You owe your season ticket holders an explanation. It's as simple as that. If you run a business, you owe your customers an explanation if your product isn't up to what the standard of the product was supposed to be. You don't try to mislead them. And you get back to, and it created a frenzy and some pushback on my boy Glenn Geffner about who's the better owner, Jeffrey Loria or Bruce Sherman. Jeffrey Loria didn't lie. He was knee jerk. He did a lot of things that obviously speaks for itself, and I'm not here to defend everything Jeffrey did. But when they were rebuilding, they were upfront about it. When they
They
were
were
going
honest.
for it, even when they were upfront about it. When they released, a Dan Jennings as their manager, general manager, let him go, they would have David Sampson immediately talking to the media. And we would be demanding that. Not let Kim Eng go, nothing but a little statement. And a month later, when Bendix is hired, then they do a press conference. Again, these are the messages that the fan base, and let's not confuse the few people on X that defend this, because they're not defending openly lying to people. They just want to see an 100% analytical blueprint. So that's why they call them the data cult. Is they don't care about the fans. They don't care about anything but their formula and their math and their method being what's going to get this team out of the doldrums that they're in. And again, who suffers? South Florida baseball, Major League Baseball, the state of Florida, spring training sites, everything. The culture. Where's the culture? Peter
That's
Bendix's quote when Christina DiNicola mentioned, asked the question, and she's done a fine job under very difficult circumstances for MLB.com, as she replaced me several years ago, was Luis Arias literally day 1 or 2, when asked by the media if he wanted to stay, said he was open to an extension. The Marlins clearly knew they weren't going to do that, and that's fine. That's their prerogative. They don't have to sign anybody. But when you sit around and Peter Bendix gives lip service and in almost, oh, that's the culture we want, players wanting to be here. I guarantee you, go around that clubhouse, ask those 26 players how many want to be here right now, because the players are having to live with it. You're seeing the frustrations in their faces. Yes, you get the Otto Lopez's because he has an opportunity to play. Yeah, he likes it here. But the thing about it is, once you've already declared where your intentions are, doesn't mean you're automatically going to lose 162 games, but you remove the pressure. Like I'm watching Tanner Scott, and I'm sure we'll get into him because he's going to be a trade candidate. And Skip's mantra is win every game. Any day you can win the game, you try to win the game, right? So what I think was their last win when they beat, I guess, Cleveland on Friday, I believe. He goes 4 outs with Tanner Scott.
yeah.
Okay, let's say you're in a more of a rebuild mode. For one, you don't really need a really good closer if you're a bad team. I mean, maybe if you're a fantasy player, you want wins, but other than betting and fantasy, a closer on a bad team is why. It doesn't really matter.
Right.
Because that's not your highest priority. When you're ready to win and you have all the pieces in place, a real team will get, okay, now I need to lock down the ninth. This person's my closer. Tanner Scott's going for, now who knows? You got 4 outs, fortunately for Tanner and the Marlins. He did it pretty efficiently. I think he retired 4 up, 4 down, got it safe. But if you're in a process of building, you see what guys can do. You put guys in that position. Maybe there's somebody in the pen you want to see in leverage situations. You don't have to go 1+ innings with Tanner Scott, who's a major trade piece for you. Because once, if that inning went sideways on him and he gets hurt, you're
Yeah.
hurting your trade pieces. I mean, I know I look at the game completely different than the average fan because I'm trained to, as a guy who's done the beat and still active BBWA member. It's like you know these things out. These are part of what teams consider. You want to see what guys can do in certain spots. You want to see what Dane Meyer can do. If you only feel that he's, when you're locked into the metrics and he's only against left-handed starter guy, and if Dane Meyer's there against a lefty, and as soon as the 6th inning or 7th inning comes along and a righty comes in the game, Jesus Sanchez is finishing that game, you don't really know what you have in Dane Meyer. Their whole blueprint is, so we've been through this. They base everything on analytics and everything on WAR. WAR is 80% of their analytics. So whatever equals the WAR that makes them happy is the direction they're going to go. But it's about player development right now.
100%.
I don't know.
The player development, that is the purpose for, if you're a Marlins fan and you're listening to this podcast, I encourage all of you to go out and watch a minor league game. Watch a game when Noble Meyer or Thomas White are playing. Go take a look at AAA Jacksonville. You're going to see Xavier Edwards, okay? He was up for 3-4 games, I believe just the Cleveland series, immediately gets optioned. He has nothing left to prove in AAA. And they're going to, I get the service time. I get that can be a factor, but that is one of the, I guess, the nuances of baseball that I really am not a big fan of, is service time manipulation, especially when it comes to a team that is rebuilding and frankly needs to see what they have in their younger players. You got Edwards, who, when he was called up, he had played in 13 games, had It was about 6 or 7 multi-hit games in AAA. Like the guy can hit. He gets called up, uh, gets a double, has a really nice diving play at shortstop. Skip can be quoted, even dating back to last year, saying, "I think this guy can play shortstop, no matter what the analytics say." Like they wanted to give him a shot. Anyway, he goes back to the minors. Tim Anderson's going to be starting, and for who knows when, until he gets DFA'd. To me, as a
Yeah.
fan, I look at that, and that is so counterintuitive. But then you hop on Twitter, and a point that I consider is very clear cut, like this makes no sense. I see people who are all aboard the Peter Bendix hype train saying, "Oh, good decision. He has so much to prove in the minors." Like, do you and they quote these abstract stats of exit velocity and stuff. Like that power and war is not all about, like, that's not it. It's not the be all end all. And these people just don't seem to understand that. Like Luis Arias, if you knew nothing about baseball and you gave like his spray chart and how he plays the game and his exit velocity and bat speed, you'd think like this guy is, if you take away the average, he's a middle, fringe infielder type college bat. He's nothing crazy, but he knows how to hit. And that the podcast you did with Todd Helensworth about the art of hitting, just pure hitting, that has been lost. It's been lost among Marlins fans. It's been lost among baseball players, and that is where the Marlins organization, I think, is starting to get into trouble.
Well, you mentioned a really good point there when you say it's lost on Marlins fans. That's what they want to be lost on Marlins fans.
Right.
When you have, and first of all, I don't know, Peter Bendix's team next year better be really good because I'm not sure if he's going to have a long tenure here. But clearly, and you can see it, and you listen to the broadcast, it's a highly analytical broadcast. They know
Yeah.
that I'm not in their corner anymore, so I'm nothing to them. So, as soon as I go away, that they'll be happy about that. Same with Glenn or anyone else that's pushing back. But they are trying to indoctrinate your generation into don't listen to the old guys. But it's not just don't listen to me, an old media guy. They're telling people don't listen to Hall of Famers like Jim Codd, Jim Palmer. In New York, Keith Hernandez, shut up. Don't You're not allowed to be near our players to tell them how to hit. Keith Hernandez can't tell players how to hit. It's ridiculous. This is ridiculous. And that's why many of us aren't going away quietly and
Right.
have these platforms. And the pendulum will swing back. It will swing back. It won't go 100% back because it's going to be more of a blending. But when the players themselves, like Todd Hollinsworth said, and thanks for mentioning it on our Man on Second on my YouTube channel. We're building, and it's not just a rant on Marlins thing. I spent a lot of time at high school levels. I was just at a prospect select event up in Jupiter the other day, and Todd Hollinsworth is offering his opinions and advice and hitting instruction for players. And the next generation of player, like he noted, there's one Aaron Judge. There's one, these
Yep.
like highly elite guys that can do that skill set. We're trying to make everybody Aaron Judge, or at the time when he was at the top of the game, Mike Trout, who has always been the poster boy for WAR. And the eye test tells you how good they are. Yeah, I get it. Everyone wants a complete player and run protection and such, but when you get to how do you want to build your organization, your franchise, it's a fitting of pieces. It's no different than how come these super teams don't always make it. Name the sport, where you put these dream lineups together, these all-star type teams, and it blows up in their face. Why doesn't it make it? A lot of times it's too many egos. A lot of times it's too many guys that have to be the guy, but only like one guy could hit third. But when you get a Luis Arias guy who is going to either hit first, second, or ninth, that type of player, eighth or ninth, how does he fit with a power guy? I give the example of 2017 when Stant won the MVP. D. Gordon stole like 50, 60 bags, and Giancarlo hit 59 homers. That's your 1-2 combo. They created a very strong dynamic, 1-2 dynamic, with a guy who hit over 300 in D. Gordon and stole 60 bags and scored 100 runs, followed by Giancarlo, who got more pitches because it wasn't that D was stationary. He would steal the bag. And if they wanted to walk G, they would, but they had at the time Ozuna with 130 something RBIs that year, and or 120, whatever it was, and Yelich, who had a solid enough year, and Real Muto. They had a formula that those guys fit. That's what you're building. You're not, so to your point, Xavier Edwards, which obviously that time's going to come where he will come up. And again, it's service time means a lot, but the Marlins kind of boxed themselves in too, with Otto Lopez is a guy they want to get a lot of looks at. But it is interesting, like you say, Skip talks up Xavier Edwards as being an everyday, at least a look, deserving of shortstop. I wonder if that's with the front office. Again, I'm not around to double check that, but that would be interesting if he's speaking as Skip Schumacher, not necessarily with the long term vision of the front office. But you kind of box yourself. You got Otto Lopez, who you want to see. I know he's been playing second. You got Brujan. You got Edwards. You're kind of put yourself where you got these kind of similar type players, and you want to get a look at them all, which gets to the plan in the vision. Because I see normally, we discussed this before about your core.
Yep.
Normally you fire sale and rebuild around a core. Like, you might look around and say, hey, we got this player's coming up, and it's their time. And when I say core, your cores are pitchers. Excuse me, it's your position players, not your pitchers. Your pitchers are your window when you really can go for it when the pitching's there. Your core are who your everyday guys. And the Marlins had that kind of core with Stanton, Yelich, Ozuna, Real Muto. They added Gordon. They had a core in place that replaced when they finally got rid of Hanley and the remains of the players that played with Hanley, which would include Ugla and Mike Jacobs and some of those guys. Where's the core here? Well, we've discussed that. Then I saw a AA Jacksonville, or excuse me, Pensacola interview, and they had one of the Marlins administrators on, and it's almost like they're tipping their hand. They're like, we think this is not going to be a very long, kind of step back when you use the word rebuild. And then he's like, got a good core in Jacksonville. And I'm like, okay, well, you're just saying you have a core. You don't have a core, but I guess, which tells me is they have no intentions of going and getting a core.
Well,
they don't
Joe,
have a core. They're just saying, like, if we sit around and say they have no core, they're probably watching the podcast and say, go out and tell, the mouthpieces, make it a talking point. And we know who they are, and they know who they are, and they know I know who they are. They will go out and have a spaces and mention they're our core. Not one of them will say they're full of it, but that's the core is what they say it is.
I don't think they even know who their core is, and I've said this for honestly since the beginning of the season. Once I saw the writing on the wall, the Marlins were going to inevitably rebuild. You needed to find who you could build around, I think. And I think every good team that comes out of a rebuild does that same thing. Look at the Baltimore Orioles, who are turning into an absolute beast in the American League. After, being the laughingstock of the American League East for a few years, they came out of the rebuild, and now they're set up with a really good young core. They didn't tear down everybody. They built up through the draft. They used player development. The Atlanta Braves, I've mentioned them in the same time of when they rebuilt, who did they keep? They kept Freddie Freeman. They kept guys. And the other thing is that when they made their trades, they didn't trade for flyers. They traded for major league ready prospects. Now you got Jesus Luzardo right here. He's got 2 years of control. And Ken Rosenthal of the Athletic, he goes, it's a done deal. He's going to be traded. Okay, he doesn't become a free agent until after 2026. So there's really not a urgency to trade him like there is an urgency to move on from Josh Bell and Tanner Scott and get something back for him. But that tells me the Marlins aren't planning to compete for 2 to 3 years. So you better
Well,
hit on this trade.
I'm not sure they know how to trade him. And what I mean by that is he had the whole off season, and remember, he's not budging. He's not budging. Peter's holding tight. All off season. All these teams, all these conversations, not budging.
Right.
Well, they didn't get a trade done. You
And they
get
were offered
evaluated by
one
your
too.
trade. Yeah, they didn't get the trade. So, oh well, no way we would get rid of him. Well, okay, let's be honest about Jesus Luzardo. He had really last year was his breakthrough year, but he hasn't really repeated that this year. And he's got a history injury, and he missed time already this year. A little bit bothered by injury. So comes off a bad, I guess he's going tonight. What if something happens to him? This is the kind of the Russian roulette game that Peter Bendix has been playing. So either you need a Luzardo to pitch at a all-star level this year to get the big return by the break that you thought you'd get by the deadline. Hasn't happened. And teams aren't going to give you his value is not going to be what they think it's going to be.
Oh, it's
Maybe it's not
decreased
going to be.
so much.
It's completely decreased. But the problem is it's like the Arise thing where they package it so nobody was interested. Non-tender candidate. There's no proof of that, of any of it. And they're saying it, and then people will just flip and say, Dylan Head's going to be a superstar. Oh my gosh. It's like, so no matter what they do, no matter who they get for Luzardo, the same people are going to make that player the next Trout. Just because that's how that's what they want. So there's no sense of reality. And for all those who think that we're just old, I'm just an old guy. Well, what have I been wrong on? Because
Right.
I think anyone had seen what I said back when this first started, everything's played out exactly the way I said it would.
It just
So
doesn't
maybe I'm
make
old, but I
sense.
haven't been wrong.
Like
You know?
like Joe, when you take a step back and you look around and you see, all the fans getting behind this philosophy and everybody not just like supporting it, like ultimately I hope Bendix works out. I truly do. I hope these prospects turn out because I'm a Marlins fan. I want this team to succeed. But when you take a look at it and you take like why? Like what is the reasoning you think this whole organizational direction change has happened and what good comes out of it? I guess is the question. Like what is the purpose for getting behind this so quickly? And being so adamant that this is the best way to be. Why aren't more people
Some
looking
people say it's
around
the
like you?
only way.
Exactly,
It's the
but like
only way.
it makes no sense.
No, it makes none. And anybody that's an honest broker, especially after Kim was let go, should have looked at this year. No one deserved the benefit of the doubt. Not one person in their front office deserved the benefit of the doubt. This hire didn't deserve the benefit of the doubt. You could say again, you could wish and hope that he does well, and I don't want this to fall apart. This is an organization like Geff said. Probably me and Geff probably have more invested blood wise in terms of the Marlins than anyone still working there.
Mm-hmm.
I put 20 years of my life, like giving up birthdays and missing family events, not going over in 18 years, never going more than 5 straight days without writing a story about the Marlins.
Wow.
And it isn't a pity party for me, because I was in an age where you didn't sit around and say, "Oh, I worked hard this week. Here I'm taking a month off." No, that every day. Take a vacation. The year that Stanton signed the extension, I told them, send me to the GM meetings because something can happen.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't send me to the GM meetings. He signs at the GM meetings. They called me up from vacation because I said, I'm going on vacation because I need to take a vacation. Joe, we need you to do the Stanton story. I get called back in after like 4 days of my vacation. to write the record-breaking contract that Giancarlo Stanton signed. That's what we did. My family, for more than 10 years, season ticket holders. I think I've said that before.
You're
on your
invested.
account. We were
Yeah.
invested, very much invested. Mike could show you my whole house. There's Marlins stuff. Jack McKeon right here, holding me holding a trophy back in 03. Tom Seaver was my childhood hero, and because I was from New York. But we were invested at a higher level than any of these people. So it's not something that we're in Glenn the same way. I can't tell you the number of people who work for the Marlins who call me up and are like, what are they doing? People the Marlins have fired, and they still want the Marlins to do well. Dontrell Willis, who they haven't treated well as an organization, comes back and is the mayor of Miami for a day on his bobblehead. Does whatever they want. Dontrell, go over there and sign autographs. And Dontrell, go talk to radio and TV. And there's Dontrell just high-fiving Jazz after his home run. These people are begging for this organization to care. But they're the ones, we're the ones they pushed away. Meaning, they don't care what our input is, what we have to say. And clearly, when I was looking at right before you hit live, through 37 home games, their attendance is 12,665 on average. Only Oakland is lower. Even the Rays, who can't draw flies, have 16,000. They're 27. I can't do that. 30, 29, 28. Yeah. What are you building? And how are you trying to get people in your stands? They seem to be, we'll get people in the stands by having the Caribbean Series, and we'll draw X amount, a couple 100,000 there, 400,000 there, and that will go towards their ticket sales here. Oh, they're doing deals with the Dominican, leagues. I have friends here in Broward who have gone to Marlins games. Oh, I went to the Marlins game and had a great time. Did they win? Oh, I don't even remember. But everyone's having fun. The ballpark's cool. I'm like happy for them. So they didn't even care. They weren't emotionally invested. They just had a fun experience at the game. But now, I'm hearing that, the Uber lot is taken away. Concession stands are shutting down in there. People can be losing their jobs, and a lot of them. They have a lot of employees are on one-year deals, talking about scouts and front office people that are in the last year. So this is a transition year potentially too for a lot of people, because a lot of people philosophically are not happy. From what I understand, departments is very hush-hush and paranoid, and people they're not communicating well among departments.
Within the scouting department specifically?
I don't want to single out people because then people could get in trouble. But various departments give very little impact or input and then direction from what they're doing. So which isn't totally uncommon. Sometimes trades are made at the highest of levels. I mean, I've had negotiations where like Jeffrey Loria alone would work out with either, Mike Hill or whatever. We're going to get this guy, and Loria would do the contract with Scott Boras, and they'd do a contract, whoever the player was. That stuff does happen, and that's fine. You don't need to tip your hand. But in terms of an environment where people are comfortable working, how comfortable is this? Whenever an organization is this bad right now, people are scared. People are scared, and that's the other thing for all those who are defending this. There's a lot of people going to lose jobs. Either get fired, good people, and then you could sit around and say, oh well, he had a bad draft or she had a bad decision, so they need to be fired. No, there's a lot of layers go on to why a player succeeds or not. And again, if you look at prospects, their top prospects are whoever is hot that week. We're now on the Joe Mack, Griffin Conine, bandwagon. Good, congrats to both of them for being hot right now. But These are just windows over any season of baseball, whether it's big league level or the minor league level. Players have hot and cold streaks. Players have weeks where they hit 5 home runs, 6 home runs, whatever, and then they finish where they kind of normally finish, or there might be, again, it's minor leagues. I always, no matter the numbers, of always perspective that minors are the minors. I'm a tools guy first, more than a data guy. I didn't need. That's why I love the one guy who's like, I wasn't a Bobby Witt Jr. believer, and I'm like, well, I was. Why were you not? Well, his OPS, he got called up at 20 on a bad Royals team. His tools just jump off the charts at you. But now now he's 22, whatever he is, and the numbers are starting to be what the projection is. It's like there's so much more to it. The sport isn't just chasing numbers and this, because this is the danger. When all the years I was there, there was always stud prospects, like real studs. When you had the Beckett, the 03 team, when they broke that up after the 05 season, you still had a Miguel Cabrera, who was still in the league, Dontrell for another year or so, and then coming up, you had Josh Johnson. When you traded, you got Hanley, who you knew was a legit dude. So you always had these guys all the way into when Stanton came around in 17, was in that draft. In 20, Yelich was in the 10 draft, 2010 draft with Yelich. You knew he was real. 11, Jose Fernandez, you knew he was real. And then, Real Muto was in the 10 draft. You knew, they always had studs. Now it's like we're making, and they did this to Isan Diaz. And I remember I was like the lone wolf saying, pump the brakes on Isan Diaz, but he's got 26 homers in AAA, and he's ready right now, and he's ready. And then he homers off DeGrom, his first at bat or first game, and everyone. And I was talking to Lewis Brinson a lot about that at the time, and I'm like, Lou, it's like you were under this microscope. You were told. How did that affect you? We all know Brinson's career didn't pan out, right? Yep. Well, he was a number one prospect. He was a top 15 or 17 prospect in baseball. Never happened, but he always had the pressure. So now you put that on Isan. And I was talking to Isan the next year in spring training, and Isan's like, I could see myself a 30-30 guy. And I'm like, it's like, slow down. Slow down. But, they rushed him and then spit him out. And that's what happens when, now what happened, almost on cue, the worst the Marlins did, immediately the attention turned to the minor leagues. So we have all the people that follow the minor leagues, and every night he's 3 for 4. Oh my goodness, Joe Mack cannot be stopped. Griffin Conine cannot be stopped. Well, guess what? They'll be stopped because they're not going to hit 4 home runs in 5 games over very many stretches. So I get the promotion of players, but the overhype tends to create a false impression of who these guys really are. It's a disservice to them, and they could, it's not their best interest when the hype gets too much, when they aren't worthy of the hype. I mean, we're seeing it right now in women's basketball with the whole Caitlin Clark thing. Oh my gosh, she's the biggest draw, but is she the best player? So and this is Caitlin Clark, who has been under the microscope, who's been a generational college player, at least for women's basketball. But the production isn't yet at the WNBA level super high, just as an example. How much do we want to dissect the moment all the time? Baseball's not geared for, it's track records. It's what do you do over 162? How many years? That's when you get a feel for what these players are. Not just Jazz hit a homer, so Jazz is going to be a perennial all-star. It's like it just is. And again, when we're just chasing numbers all the time, it kind of has fans conditioned to only measure production. And at the moment, and there's a lot of reasons why guys do well in the minor leagues. Some are they're just hot. Some are because they're really good. Some are because the pitching they're facing is terrible. It's just guys that you'll never hear or see from again. A guy makes a bad pitch, and maybe or all of his homers just on mistake pitches, or the homers on the guy's legitimately showing really good pitch recognition and his approach is really good. Is it because it's ballparks that the ball carries? The other thing, going back to Eson, what ruined him also in that 2018, I can't, 18 or not, someone will correct, if they look at the minor league numbers for New Orleans, that's when the juice balls were in the minor leagues. You had like fringe players, like guys who never hit more than 2 homers as like the 25th man utility guy going to AAA and hitting 15 to 20 homers. Guys were hitting the ball out left and right because of the juice baseballs. So I'm not saying they're juice baseballs in the minor leagues right now, but there's a lot of factors why you don't. Austin Dean hit 350 one year in AAA. Everyone thought he was going to be a batting champ in the big leagues. It's like this. You create these very false impressions with who these guys are. Which again, I have a very much a evaluation type of background, and a lot of my sourcing are some of the best evaluators around. That you get a read. No, yay, no, yes, that's real. That's just I mean, they're minor leaguers who hit 30 homers.
So,
Like the history of baseball, you'll see a lot of those, and they never made it to the big leagues as anything really good.
as someone that, is an evaluator of talent and someone that is more geared toward tools, when you got the results of the Luis Arias trade, for example, what was your immediate reaction to a guy who is probably the most quote unquote toolsy player in the Marlins system now, like Dylan Head? Because they traded a back-to-back batting champion for him.
I just got a very quick read that it was a bad trade. It
Right.
wasn't a great trade. And and again, you could have some people I respect who thinks the kid's gonna be really good. But what's really good? It's gonna make it to the big leagues and be a fourth outfielder. That's not a bad career for guys to be. But is that when you're at the position the Marlins are at? Is that what is that the centerpiece of your trade? My first reaction on the Rise trade is just why? It's like, why you do that? And like Gaff eloquently mentioned, when you're paying it all, you carry it to the deadline. You try to win as much. I mean, you're carrying
Yeah.
Skip. You can make that decision at any time if you want to kind of gear towards 25. And if Skip's not going to be the guy, unless they secretly are talking to Skip about coming back and he's open to that, which I'd be asking a lot of people if I were still on the beat, but that's not my job right now. It's like, why did you need to move him then? But I think it's something that we kind of touched on, I think, before you hit the record button, is if I'm the Marlins and you don't, okay, so what are the solutions? I've kind of mapped out why I think it went wrong. How do you
How
change
do
it?
we fix this?
How do
Yeah.
we fix it? Um, I would have liked to see a big trade. To me, I'm packaging Luzardo with Tanner Scott and maybe even someone else. Maybe that's how you move. Maybe that's how you move Bell's money. If you do a 3 or 4 person trade, maybe you could get rid of Bell and someone picks up a couple of million of that, the final little bit of his contract. That's to me what I would be doing, but um, I'm not sure they're geared that way. And even if you got to engage a third team, because why do you do that? That's an old Jack McKeon philosophy. It's like basically if you go back to when they moved Miguel Cabrera, which obviously it's a dark day in Marlins history, this trade. But what did they do? They attached Dontrell because they were, Dontrell was at the point where he was regressing a bit here in Miami. He was more hurt. It was really kind of weird and sad how it kind of fell fast for him. But it was like, okay, Detroit wants Miguel. The Marlins had, obviously Maben and Andrew Miller as kind of the headliners of that. But how do you engage more and bring back a bigger return you threw Dontrell in then, and you got it. You got 6 players back. It didn't, obviously, we don't need to rehash it. It didn't work. But if you want to look at a trade where it did work, it was probably one of the most devastating trades in franchise history in terms of breaking trust with the public. Right after you get a new ballpark built in 2012, I believe is when it opened, and then you sign Jose Reyes and Mark Burley, and then you get that trade and package all of them and send them to Toronto. But if history, yes, and I know at the time it was a good. If you just looked at it as a baseball trade, it was an interesting and good baseball trade. But clearly, you can't open a new building, hire a Jose Reyes or sign us Jose Reyes, who's coming off a batting title in New York and a dynamic player and a fan favorite type of guy, and then immediately jettison him after 1 year. But yeah, I would do that. I'd make a big trade. I would just, instead of these little trades. And I will tell you this: I think the Ryan Weathers injury is interesting because I don't think anyone's raised his name, but I wouldn't have been surprised if the Marlins were shopping Ryan Weathers. And, because I think
Wow.
internally they were looking to say, is Ryan Weathers, who has never really had a track record of being really good, that's why San Diego moved him, is just this a hot streak? Because organizations have to be honest with themselves. Not everybody is at their best, and that's sustainable. But now his injury probably puts a damper. But it also, if he's out for any extended period and you move Luzardo, let's say, at what point are you going to need some arms? I mean, you could always find someone, obviously, but what's the second half of the year is going to look like with the pitching rotation? So they're in a real bind. They gotta figure it out. I would hope for some good Luzardo outings where he establishes health, but I think the bigger return you're going to get is going to have to be a multiplayer package. That's why I wasn't crazy, and I'm not a Blade guy, and everyone knows me. No, I was the one saying they should have taken either Riley Green or C.J. Abrams at the time, and wouldn't have been bad if
CJ
they had done
Abrams
that.
would have been nice.
Yeah, and even Riley Green, I know he's
Oh
had
yeah.
his ups and downs, but one's a center fielder, one's a shortstop, and I still think CJ is going to play solid enough shortstop. You would have probably addressed both of those areas with one of those two. But that said, and I had this conversation with someone actually, not with the Marlins, but someone else. When they traded Blade for AJ Puck, I did not like that trade. And it's on the surface, it seemed fine. You had a guy who was like the sixth pick or fourth pick in the draft, didn't work out. Another guy who was like the sixth pick in the draft, change of scenery type of thing. Uh, um, why I didn't like that trade was I thought that certainly Blade was capable of having some good years in the big leagues. It's just the matter of, for the fourth pick in the draft, you're wanting a starter, a no doubt starter with an occasional all-star type of years. So for him to have a good year, good for him. I don't buy into, oh, well, he never was going to, we don't develop hitters. So therefore, I don't buy into that generalization because and again, I know that there were things done with JJ and his development that was detrimental. But I would have liked, if you're moving your first round pick from a few years ago, I thought you could package Blade in what I'm just talking about now. Because you could have, let's say you still have Blade and he was in the minors and not, or up and down, hadn't been doing great. You could attach him to a Luzardo trade and really bring in a bigger haul, if you see what I'm saying.
Yeah, it
That I
increases the
think I
value
think you
of
move
the
a
return.
top 5 pick, a Blade, as part of a package, not one failed first rounder for another failed first rounder. Technically,
Right, because you look at this upcoming deadline, and to your point of packaging together your trade chips for a better prospect return, and you mentioned spending if you can bring the money down in with the Josh Bell deal. And I'm of the opinion, kind of the opposite of at this point, I want to see the Marlins just get a better return, try to package Josh Bell because he's quietly heated up. He's a
Hmm.
veteran who knows how to hit. He's been on winning teams before. Put him in a position to win, change the scenery, pay off the 16 million. You already paid off the 10 million for Luis Arias this year. You might as well just eat the money this year,
I,
since this is going to
I
be a
hear what
year
you're saying,
rebuild.
but you're not going to get a Josh Bell 1-for-1's not getting you more than
Well, not a one for one,
you
but
know,
you could package him with,
but you could
let's say,
package. Yeah, I
Luzardo.
know. I see what you're saying, but I just
Yeah,
I'm don't know whether he's going to have that kind of market, where
right.
anyone would want him. Now, again, what are we watching now? We're watching players play for themselves. They're playing for their
Essentially,
numbers right now.
that's it.
I mean, and that's what makes Skip's job even harder, and which is natural. I mean, Josh Bell, if he finished the year hitting under 200, what's that going to do for his career? He's going to be a guy next year. He's going to be a non-roster guy, and somewhere in May. So for him to perform at all is going to be important for him to for his career. Jazz is the interesting one. What are you doing with Jazz? Because if you're going to move Jazz, now might be the time. If you keep Jazz, at some point you got to pay Jazz. So
I think Jazz is
I
gone.
don't see them paying Jazz. I agree with you. I
No,
think he's going to be gone. So it's like that again. What if you package Jazz with Luzardo or Jazz with Scott or something like that's where I think you could get some legit.
that
I'm not as
intrigues
big
me.
on top. I'm not intrigued. I'm not interested in top 100s. I mean, it's top 100 is just someone's subjective opinion. I want if someone's the 60th player in pipelines, but my scouting department, my evaluation team thinks that guy is like a top 30 guy. That's all that matters. It doesn't matter. 30 MLB teams just look at Pipeline or Baseball America, with all due respect to them, and anyone and me in the media as well. They look at that with a grain of salt. They just whatever. I'm not as caught up as some of our fans. Like you could, if you move the two or three guys I'm talking about, and you got the 70th, 80th, and 90th best prospects, as well as some guys with big league, the role playing guys that with big league experience to round out a seven or so player trade return. And my people like that trade. I'll sing the praises of that as if they got a top 10 guy. It's
Hmm.
what you feel you got. It doesn't have to be, well, if they don't get Jackson Holiday back, then that's a failure. If that makes sense. So my point is, I don't top 20, top 100 lists are just that. They're a lot of it is just more for fun. They're not entirely accurate. Is my point. But yeah, you got to look at how do you do that? You make the biggest splash return you can, and then if you keep Tim Anderson as depth the second half, and he knows he's not playing, and then you cut him in September, he helps ease if Bruhan or Edwards gets hurt again or something like that, where you're gonna have somebody playing at the end of the year, and you're gonna need some sort of veteran presence in your clubhouse to help you with the losing, to keep your head up and play every day. That's the other thing. We haven't even talked about leadership. Where's even leadership on this team? Because it has to come from the coaching staff, but the coaches more than likely aren't going to be here. So it's like, you got they got to make a call at some point. But I would recommend to bring the biggest haul. You would probably have to package a few of these guys that we're talking about now.
I think the biggest trade assets they have right now is Jazz, Luzardo, Tanner Scott. You could throw Josh Bell in there as just because there's no reason to keep him, and you could trade him for pennies on the dollar and it wouldn't be a loss to you. You're not going to the playoffs anyway. Might as well get what you can for him. But a package with Luzardo and Jazz. Imagine that at the deadline. That's going to be the story of the 2024 deadline. If the Marlins
Yep.
deal Jazz and Luzardo together, or even Jazz and Scott. Scott, who knows, maybe all three. A team is always going to need bullpen. And at this point, most of the buyers are going to be looking for pitching depth. And Jazz is an interesting case. I talked to Alex Kruchik from Fish on First about this. If a team trades for Jazz, you could keep him in center field, or if they like him at shortstop and still see him playing in the middle infield, second base, shortstop, you could try to make a transition into 2025 with him in the infield. Like, there's options you can do. He's not limited defensively. He's proven he can play adequate center field. And I think that would take a lot of balls for the front office. It would to, trade away your face of the franchise, the guy that's on MLB The Show, trade him away and put your money where your mouth is. If you're going to rebuild, commit to the rebuild. You have to right now. Once you traded Arias, the writing was on the wall. Now it's about, like you said, maximizing the return by themselves. I remember, I believe it was Craig Mish who tweeted out about Jesus Luzardo. In the offseason, the Marlins were shopping him. They found a trade partner in the Orioles. The Orioles wanted to trade Joey Ortiz. Marlins said no. Well, hindsight's 2020. I'd love to have Joey Ortiz right now. I would have taken that one because he's a major league ready prospect that is producing in the major league level.
Yeah.
And ultimately, the Brewers traded for Ortiz and gave up Corbin Burns, which should tell you where the pitching market was, which should tell you why it's even more absurd they didn't take that deal. But now you have a second chance. Now you have a healthy Jazz. You have that leverage where, hey, Jazz Chisholm Jr. is healthy. He's played a full season. The only off days he's had has been when he's taken rest. He's hitting for power. He's got the speed. If you're into tools,
Oh,
he's
he
got
can
all the
change the
tools.
game.
Take him and take
We know
Luzardo.
that. Yeah. Yeah, he
So,
has the ability to change the game in many ways
yep.
with his bat, his glove, and his speed, and his he's a dynamic player. But that's what I'm getting at. That's how you're going to make the most noise is to do that, because if you don't trade Jazz, then what are you doing? You took him to ARB hearing for less than $200,000. If he hits 30 homers or even 25 homers, his price tag is going to go up. So what are you going to move him in the offseason? And then you're gonna have you have to convince a team right now. I know, and we're getting pressed for time. Seattle, my boy, Mike Ferrin mentioned on MLB Network Radio a couple of weeks back, and I tweeted it out that he just kind of threw how the Mariners need offense, and the Marlins had moved Arias at shortly before there, and they said, call Miami, you need enough, go get Jazz right now. And he said, I'm not saying they've already talked, but that's if you want to get someone, go get Jazz right now. And so maybe there's a Seattle type of fit, and with that. But again, I try to get as many pieces and engage. You bring a players back here in a trade. There's a good chance you're stocking up. Your big league roster is going to get some of them, and then your system's going to get. And even if the guys are never going to be big league contributors, maybe they're solid enough as minor leaguers that make your minor league system stronger, which allows the other prospects who have a chance to face, to be in a stronger lineup as well. Because
And then
that's
you can
something
flip
that I
those
guarantee
for
that's way over the heads of so many of the people I'm talking to. But there are hitters, there are players, there are organizations that sit around. Let's say you want your AA lineup to be really good. But you have one guy, but he gets pitched around. Well, you go and get a guy like a Derek Dietrich a couple of years ago who was in the minor leagues, who had been in the big leagues, to kind of add protection to your lineup. That type of stuff. If you got to get out of here now, let's do it.
Well, I think it's just about an hour. Another great conversation with you, Joe. But really quick before we wrap it up, you're talking about the minor leagues, and even if the prospects come back and they're not immediately plug and play into the majors, and you get a couple major league ready guys, the rest of the guys, if they're talented enough, I mean, even with the Luis Arias deal, Martorella, Marcy, who knows? Like, in the next couple years, you might find yourself in a position where you can take these prospects and then flip them and go buy another major league ready guy, and
Exactly.
trade prospects. So it's going to take time, but right now it's about maximizing the value you can. You put yourself into this situation. You have to get out of it. And as Marlins fans, that's all we can hope for. I hope Luzardo. We're recording this on Tuesday. The episode will be out Thursday. So hopefully Luzardo goes out tonight and gets back to his old self, because I'll certainly be worried if he gives up another 9 earned runs. But Joe, thank you for coming on the pod today.
Sure, by anytime. Thank you.
All right. And with that, let's go fish.